trusted my family to support me after birth. But my mother-in-law made a decision about my baby that left me feeling betrayed and powerless inside. The words echoed in my mind like a cruel joke as I stared at the tiny red dots on my daughter's lobes. The cheap gold studs glinting under the kitchen light where Evelyn sat rocking Ava in her arms, humming some old lullaby as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just taken my newborn out while I slept off the exhaustion of labor and drilled holes into her perfect capture. Unmarred skin without so much as a text to ask if it was okay, because, of course, she knew better. She'd raised 3 kids herself back in the day when no one fussed over such things. But this was my baby, my Ava, my Ava. The one I'd carried for 9 months through morning sickness that left me heaving over the toilet at work, through the swollen ankles that made every shift at the office feel like a marathon, through the birthing classes Ben and I attended religiously every Tuesday night, squeezing hands and practicing breaths in a room full of other wide-eyed couples, all of us dreaming of that first perfect hold. And now here I was, 3 days postpartum, my body still aching from the 20-hour labor that ended in an emergency C-section because Ava's heart rate dipped too low, the scar pulling tight every time I moved, my breasts leaking milk through the nursing pads I'd slept on in a haze that morning, and I'd trusted them. Trusted Ben to run to the pharmacy for more pain meds and Evelyn to watch Ava while I crashed on the couch for what was supposed to be a quick nap, but turned into 4 hours of dead sleep. The kind where dreams bleed into worries about SIDS and feeding schedules, only to wake to the sound of the front door clicking shut and Evelyn's voice crowing, "Look at you, my little princess." All dressed up now, and I stumbled into the kitchen, my hair matted, robe half open. The living room still cluttered with congratulatory cards and wilting flowers from neighbors, the coffee maker beeping its empty pot reminder. And there she was, my mother-in-law, beaming like she'd won a prize, holding Ava up for me to see. And at first, I thought it was the light playing tricks. But no, those were earrings, tiny loops pushed through fresh piercings, the skin around them puffy and angry. Ava fussing in a way that twisted my gut because she was only 3 days old, too young for pain like that, too fragile for someone else's idea of pretty, and I froze, my hands shaking as I reached for her, whispering, "What did you do?" But it came out sharper, a crack in my voice that made Evelyn's smile falter just a bit, her eyes narrowing like I was overreacting. "Oh, honey, it's just earrings." I took her to that little shop at the mall, the one with the nice lady who does it quick and clean. I had my girls done at this age and they turned out fine. It's a family tradition, you know. And she looked so adorable, as if that justified it. As if tradition trumped the conversation Ben and I had months ago. Lying in bed, scrolling through parenting forums on our phones, debating whether we'd ever pierce her ears or let her decide when she was older, agreeing we wanted to wait, to respect her body, because I'd grown up with my own mom, pushing me into things I wasn't ready for, ballet classes and frilly dresses that made me itch. And I'd vowed not to do that to my child, but Evelyn had steamrolled right over it, had bundled Ava into her car seat while I slept, driven to the mall with its fluorescent lights and crowds of shoppers sipping lattes, paid some stranger to clamp a gun to my baby's ears, all because she thought it was her right, her grandmotherly prerogative, and the betrayal hit me like a wave. Not just the act, but the secrecy. The assumption that she knew better than me, the new mom, still figuring out how to latch properly, still jumping at every cry. And I snatched Ava from her arms, maybe too roughly, because Ava wailed louder, her little face scrunching up, and I felt the tears burning my eyes as I checked the piercings, seeing the specks of blood on the cotton balls Evelyn must have used. "You had no right," I said, my voice breaking. "We didn't want this. I told you yesterday I wanted to wait." But Evelyn stood up, crossing her arms over her floral blouse, the one she wore to help out every day, since we got home from the hospital, smelling of lavender soap and judgment. "You're hormonal, Sarah. It's the baby blues talking. She'll thank me one day. And besides, Ben mentioned he thought it was cute when I brought it up last week, and that stopped me cold. The implication that my husband had been in on it, or at least ambivalent, though I knew he hadn't. He'd rolled his eyes at her suggestions over dinner. picking at the takeout pizza we'd ordered because no one had energy to cook. But doubt crept in anyway. Postpartum, brain fog, making everything feel like a conspiracy. And I backed away, cradling Ava to my chest. Her warmth against my skin, the only anchor in the spinning room. The kitchen counters still sticky from the breakfast smoothies Evelyn had insisted on blending at dawn. The dishwasher humming in the background, like nothing was wrong, but everything was. Because this wasn't just about earrings. It was about control, about how I'd let her in to support us, to fold laundry and heat up casseroles from the freezer. Trusting her because Ben adored his mom, always saying she meant well. But now I felt stripped bare, powerless in my own home. My body not even fully mine yet, with the stitches and the bleeding. And she'd taken my daughter, made a permanent mark without asking. And the pain of it clawed at me, guilt flooding in because I should have been awake. Should have set firmer boundaries, but exhaustion had won. And now Ava was hurt, crying because of a choice that wasn't hers or mine. And I turned away, murmuring to her, "I'm sorry, baby. Mommy's so sorry." As Evelyn huffed, "Don't make this a big deal. It's done now." But it was a big deal. It shattered something inside me. The fragile trust I built with this new family dynamic. And when Ben walked in moments later, bags rustling with ibuprofen and nibble cream. His face dropped at the tension. "What's going on?" he asked, setting everything on the table next to the half-eaten bagel from lunch. And I couldn't speak, just pointed at Ava's ears, tears streaming now, hot and unstoppable, and he looked confused and angry, turning to his mom. "Mom, what the hell?" "We talked about this," but she waved him off. "She'll get over it. It's tradition." And the argument erupted, voices overlapping in the small space. Ben defending me, but hedging because it was his mother. Evelyn insisting she was helping. And me retreating to the bedroom, door closed. Nursing Ava in the dim light from the rain-streaked window, the suburban street outside blurred with February drizzle. Cars splashing past on their way to school pickups or grocery runs. Normal life continuing while mine cracked open, the betrayal settling deep. Making me question every offer of help, every family tie. Wondering if I'd ever feel safe again in this house we'd bought 2 years ago. The one with the nursery painted soft blue. The mobile spinning lazily above the crib. And as Ava quieted, latching finally her tiny hand on my skin, I felt the raw ache of it all, the powerlessness of being a new mom, undermined before I even started. The fallout immediate as Ben's raised voice filtered through the door, telling his mom she needed to go home for now. Her protest sharp, the front door slamming eventually, leaving silence broken only by the tick of the wall clock and my muffled sobs, knowing this was just the beginning of the hurt. The anger boiling under the grief. Wondering how we'd ever rebuild from here. That first full night stretched into something endless and suffocating. The house settling around us like a held breath after Evelyn finally left. Her car, lights cutting across the wet driveway before disappearing into the dark suburban street where porch lights flickered on one by one as neighbors finished dinner or walked dogs in the drizzle. And Ben and I stood in the hallway for what felt like minutes, but was probably seconds. Neither of us knowing how to move forward. Ship. The air thick with the scent of leftover Chinese takeout we'd ordered in a numb attempt at normalcy around 8. The white carton still open on the kitchen island next to Ava's bottle warmer that beeped softly when the water reached temperature. A reminder that life kept demanding its routines, even when everything else felt broken. And I couldn't look at him directly. Not yet. Because every time our eyes met, I saw the earrings reflected back. Those tiny gold specks that now seemed to pulse with accusation. And the doubt Evelyn had planted lingered like smoke. Her casual mention that Ben had thought it was cute, twisting in my chest even though I'd watched him shut her down weeks ago over tacos on the patio. Saying firmly, "Mom, we're waiting until she's old enough to ask for them herself," his voice steady while he scrolled emails on his phone. But postpartum paranoia had me replaying every conversation, wondering if there'd been a moment he'd wavered, a joke or a shrug I missed, because I was too tired or too focused on the endless cycle of feedings and diaper changes. And now the silence between us felt heavier than any argument, heavier than the slam of the door when he told her to go, his words clit and final. "You crossed a line, Mom. Just go home. We'll talk later," her reply sharp with hurt indignation. I was trying to help, Benjamin. You know how fragile she is right now. But he'd held the door open until she walked through it, keys jangling, and then he'd come back inside. Shoulders slumped, avoiding my gaze as he cleared the table of half-eaten egg rolls and fortune cookies no one had cracked open. We ended up in the living room eventually, lights low, because Ava had finally drifted off in her bassinet after a long Kayer DPN fussy nursing session where she kept pulling away from the soreness of her lobes. Her cries sharper than usual, making my milk let down in painful rushes that soaked through yet another nursing bra. And I sat on the couch wrapped in a throw blanket that still smelled faintly of Evelyn's lavender detergent from when she'd folded it yesterday. Staring at the TV screen, where Netflix asked if we were still watching some mindless sitcom we put on for background noise days ago, the laugh track echoing hollowly, and Ben sat on the other end, close enough to touch but not touching, his phone face down on the cushion between us. Screen lighting up occasionally with texts he ignored, probably his sister checking in or work, pinging about the paternity leave extension he'd requested. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, careful. Sarah, I swear I didn't know she was going to do it. I told her no multiple times. And I believed him mostly, the raw edge in his tone matching the guilt. I could see carving lines around his eyes. But the mostly mattered because trust had cracked open today, and everything leaked through the fissure, so I just nodded, tears slipping down again without warning. The kind that come from deep inside, where exhaustion and hormones and betrayal tangle together, and I whispered, She took her without asking, Ben. She just decided. The words tasting like ash, because saying them aloud made it real all over again. The image of Ava bundled in her car seat at some mall kiosk, the piercing gun clicking twice while I slept upstairs, helpless and oblivious. And he reached out then, hesitant, his hand hovering before settling on my knee. Warm through the blanket, but I flinched and heh. Not because I didn't want comfort, but because every touch felt loaded now, every gesture potentially another boundary crossed. And he pulled back immediately, murmuring, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. But he didn't finish. Just rubbed his face with both hands, with Apig, the stubble rasping against his palms. The same stubble I teased him about, not shaving since the hospital, because new dad Scruff looked cute in photos. Photos we'd taken of Ava's first bath, her tiny fists waving. None of us imagining the shadow falling so soon. The clock on the wall ticked past 11, then midnight, the rain picking up outside, drumming on the roof like it wanted in, and we talked in fragments. Sentences starting and stopping. Him explaining how Evelyn had texted him at the pharmacy, asking if she could run a quick errand. Him replying, sure, thinking groceries or diapers. Not this. And me admitting the guilt that gnawed at me for napping so deeply. For not setting a firmer rule like no taking the baby anywhere without us. Rules that felt unnecessary before, because family was supposed to be safe. Supposed to support, not override. And the grief hit in waves, not just for what happened, but for the innocence lost. The way I'd pictured these early weeks as cocooned and tender, filled with sleepy cuddles and late night feeds, while Ben brought me water, and we whispered about her future. Not this fracture that forced us to question every decision, every person we'd let close. Around 1, we gave up trying to talk, the words circling without resolution. And when Ava stirred with a soft whimper, I went to her first, lifting her carefully, mindful of her ears, changing her diaper by the glow of the nightlight, shaped like a crescent moon we'd bought together at Target months ago. The one that projected stars on the ceiling in gentle rotation. And Ben followed quietly, standing in the doorway, watching us, his expression a mix of love and regret. And when I settled back in the rocking chair to nurse again, he didn't leave, just sank onto the floor beside us, back against the crib, close but giving space. And we stayed like that until the feeding ended, Ava's breathing evening out against my chest, her warmth seeping into me like a small promise that she was still here, still ours, despite the mark someone else had left. And eventually, Ben stood, offering his hand this time without touching first, waiting until I placed mine in his, fingers lacing tentatively. The contact electric with everything unsaid, and we moved to the bedroom together, the hallway light clicking off behind us. But when we reached the bed, I hesitated. The king-size mattress, that had felt too big before labor now, seeming too small for the distance between us. So I said quietly, I need to sleep alone tonight. Not angry, exactly, just honest. Needing the space to breathe without feeling watched or judged or pitied. And he nodded. No argument, just a soft, okay, I'll take the couch, grabbing a pillow and the extra blanket from the closet. His movements slow, deliberate, like he was handling something fragile that might shatter if he moved too fast. And as he left the room, I climbed under the covers, still in my nursing tank and yoga pants, the sheets cool against my skin, the pillow still dented from my earlier nap, and I lay there listening to the house, sounds, the hum of the fridge downstairs, the occasional creak of floorboards as Ben settled in the living room, the rain softening to a patter, and the tears came again, quieter this time, soaking into the fabric. Grief. For the day we'd lost, for the trust we'd have to rebuild, brick by painful brick. By painful brick, anger at Evelyn, simmering low but steady, guilt at my own vulnerability, mixing with a fierce protectiveness that made me curl tighter around the empty space where Ava would sleep in her bassinet. Beside me, soon, and somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, exhaustion finally pulled me under. Dreams fragmented with images of tiny ears and locked doors, and Ben's hand, reaching but never quite touching, waking only when Ava's first hungry cry pierced the quiet, pulling me back to the reality that the night had changed nothing and everything. The confession still hanging between us unfinished. The sleeping apart, a temporary boundary that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. A small, cool, simple, raw step into whatever came next. The morning after that endless night arrived, gray and damp, the kind of February Thursday where the sky never really commits to light. Just hovers in a muted wash over the neighborhood, streetlights still glowing. Faintly when I carried Ava downstairs at 6:30. Her weight a steady comfort against my shoulder, even as every step tugged at the C-section incision. The pain meds Ben had left on the nightstand untouched because I wanted to feel clear-headed for whatever came next. And the house smelled faintly of yesterday's takeout and the coffee he must have started brewing before dawn, because the pot was half full. Still warm. 2 mugs sitting on the counter like an olive branch he hadn't dared to offer in person yet, and I could hear him in the guest bathroom showering. The water running longer than usual, probably standing under the spray, trying to wash away the residue of last night's fragments. The way we ended up sleeping in separate rooms, for the first time since we moved in together, 7 years ago. Not out of spite exactly, but out of sheer necessity, the space between us, feeling safer than closeness, when everything was still so raw. I settled Ava, in her bouncer, on the kitchen table, the one with the little jungle animals that spun lazily when you pulled the string. And she stared up at the ceiling fan with wide, unfocused eyes. Her earlobes still slightly swollen under the tiny gold posts I hadn't yet found the courage to remove, because the pediatrician's office said to leave them. In for at least 6 weeks to avoid infection, advice I Googled obsessively at 3 a.m. On my phone, while Ben snored on the couch downstairs, and the sight of them made my stomach twist again, not with the same white-hot fury of yesterday, but with a quieter, more insidious grief. The realization that this small, tallish, permanent change to her body was something I couldn't undo, something that would mark her baby pictures forever. Every first smile and milestone framed by a decision that wasn't ours. Ben emerged eventually, hair damp, wearing the same gray hoodie he had slept in, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept much either, and he paused in the doorway, taking in the scene, me in yesterday's leggings and nursing tank. Ava kicking softly, the dishwasher I'd forgotten to run humming its cycle, and said quietly, "Morning," the word careful, testing the air, and I managed a nod, not trusting my voice yet, because if I opened my mouth, everything might spill out again. The anger at his mother, the flicker of doubt about whether he'd been firm enough when he told her no, the bone-deep fear that this was the first crack in the family we were trying so hard to build. We moved through the morning routine on autopilot. Him pouring coffee into both mugs without asking if I wanted any. Me warming a bottle, even though I planned to nurse soon because sometimes the bottle felt like a small reclaiming of control. Something I could measure and time. And when Ava fussed, we took turns holding her, passing her back and forth without words. His hands brushing mine once and lingering just a second too long. Before he pulled away, respecting the invisible line I'd drawn last night. Around 9, his phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. I saw the screen light up on the counter where he'd left it, and he glanced at it, jaw tightening. Then turned the phone, face down again, but not before I caught the preview. I'm so sorry if I overstepped. I just love her so much. Can we talk? And something in me hardened further. Not because I didn't believe the apology might be genuine in her own way, but because it felt too soon, too easy, like she wanted absolution without fully owning the violation. And I said, low enough that it almost didn't carry. Don't answer her yet. And he looked up, surprised, but not defensive, just nodded. I wasn't going to, and set the phone in the drawer with the extra batteries and takeout menus out of sight. A small gesture that eased something in my chest, even as it underscored how much ground we still had to cover. The rest of the morning blurred into protecting Ava from the fallout. Or maybe protecting myself through her, changing her into a fresh onesie, with little ducks on it, the fabric soft from too many washes already. Applying the saline solution the piercing place had given Evelyn in a tiny bottle I found tucked in the diaper bag, dabbing carefully while whispering apologies she couldn't understand, then bundling her up for her first real outing since the hospital. Not to the mall or anywhere public, but just a slow walk around the block, the stroller, wheels hissing on wet pavement, past houses with basketball hoops in driveways and minivans backing out for preschool drop-offs. The normalcy of it all feeling both comforting and cruel, because my world had tilted while everyone else's kept spinning. Ben came with us, unasked, just grabbed his jacket and fell into step beside the stroller, hands in pockets, and we didn't speak much. Angria didn't speak much, just commented on the way the crocuses were starting to push through the mulch in Mrs. Forend. Carter's yard next door, or how the rain had left everything looking newly rinsed. But the silence wasn't hostile anymore. More like two people learning to breathe in the same space again after holding their breath too long. Back home, I texted my best friend, Lena, the one who'd driven 3 hours to bring us a lasagna, the day we got discharged, asking if she could come over this afternoon, needing someone outside the immediate circle who wouldn't defend Evelyn out of loyalty or habit. And when she arrived around 2 with coffee from the drive-thru and a bag of those chocolate croissants Ava would one day love. I let her in while Ben took Ava upstairs for a nap, giving us the living room, and I told her everything, starting from the moment I woke to the earrings. The words tumbling out faster than I could shape them, tears coming again, but slower now, less frantic. And Lena listened, without interrupting, just reached over once to squeeze my hand when my voice cracked on. She took her without asking, and when I finished, she said simply, that was not okay. Sarah, none of it. No platitudes about family meaning well or postpartum hormones. Just acknowledgement. And it felt like the first real exhale I'd taken since yesterday. We talked boundaries then. Practical ones, Ben and I agreeing later that evening, after Lena left and Ava was down again, that Evelyn wouldn't come over unannounced anymore. That any help would be scheduled and supervised until trust could be rebuilt if it ever could. That we'd handle visitors together. No more solo babysitting, and I felt a small reclaiming of power in saying the words aloud. Even as guilt nipped at the edges, because she was his mother, because Ava deserved grandparents. But not at the cost of my sanity or my daughter's bodily autonomy. Ben listened, without arguing, adding only that he'd call his mom tomorrow. Set the same rules himself, so it didn't all fall on me. And when he said I should have been clearer from the start, I let her push because it was easier. There was real regret there, the kind that made his voice thicken. And I didn't absolve him yet, but I didn't pull away either when he sat closer on the couch, our knees almost touching. All low, Nive, almost touching. The space between us shrinking by millimeters. Dinner with scrambled eggs and toast, because neither of us had energy for more. Eaton standing at the island while Ava slept upstairs, the baby monitor crackling softly with her even breaths. And afterward, we loaded the dishwasher together. Elbows, brushing. No rush. no pressure, just the quiet rhythm of everyday tasks that suddenly felt like acts of repair. Small proofs that we were still a team, even if the foundation had shaken. When night came, I didn't ask him to sleep on the couch again. Instead, I said, "Stay, but on your side." And he did, sliding under the covers carefully, leaving a deliberate gap, and we lay there in the dark, listening to each other breathe. Not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating across the mattress, the rain starting up again outside, tapping the window like a patient reminder that time kept moving, that healing wasn't linear, but possible, in increments, in trements. And as sleep finally tugged at me, I let myself think. Just for a moment, that maybe the anger was starting to loosen its grip, making room for something cautious, something that looked a little like hope if you squinted through the hurt. By Friday afternoon, the walls of the house felt too close, every corner holding the echo of yesterday's careful conversations and the night before's separate sleeping. So when Ben suggested I take the weekend to myself, I didn't argue, just nodded once. The decision settling over me like cool water on fevered skin, because staying here meant orbiting the same spaces where the betrayal still lingered, in the kitchen where Evelyn had stood beaming with Ava in her arms, in the nursery where the rocking chair still creaked, with the memory of my midnight apologies to our daughter. And I needed distance, not from him necessarily, but from the weight of trying to hold everything together while my body was still knitting itself back into shape and my mind kept replaying the click of that piercing gun I'd never heard but could imagine too vividly. We arranged it quietly over lunch. Leftover scrambled eggs, reheated in the microwave. Ava dozing in her swing with the little mobile of stars turning above her, and Ben said he'd handle everything here. Drop her at his sister Claire's for a few hours. Saturday, so he could catch up on work emails, without distraction. But Claire had already texted, offering to help, after he had given her a brief, sanitized version of what happened. Careful not to paint Evelyn as the villain outright, because family loyalties ran deep, even when lines were crossed. I packed a small duffel while Ava napped that afternoon. Just enough for 2 nights. Yoga pants, nursing bras, the pump, in case my supply dipped from stress. A paper bag I hadn't touched since before labor. And the bottle of pain meds I finally let myself take regularly. Now that the haze felt safer than sharp awareness, Ben watched from the doorway as I zipped the bag, his expression unreadable, but not resentful. And when I said, I'm going to Lena's. She has the guest room ready. He only asked if I wanted him to drive me or if I'd rather take the car myself. And I chose the car because driving alone, even the 40-minute stretch of highway to her townhouse, felt like reclaiming something small and mine. The radio low on some station, playing acoustic covers. Windows cracked to let in the damp March air that carried the faint promise of spring beneath the chill. Lena met me at her door with a hug that lasted longer than usual. No questions at first. Just ushered me inside where the living room smelled of vanilla, candle, and fresh laundry. Her cat curling around my ankles like he remembered me from pre-baby visits. And she poured tea, chamomile, because caffeine still made my heart race unpredictably. And we sat on her couch under a throw she'd bought in Mexico years ago, soft and fraying at the edges. And I let the silence stretch until it felt safe enough to speak. I told her more than I had on the phone. The parts I'd glossed over. How Evelyn's text had sat unanswered in Ben's drawer like a live wire. How I kept checking Ava's ears every time she fussed. Had Avanid's ears every time she fussed. Convinced the redness meant infection, even though the pediatrician had said it was normal healing. How the guilt kept circling back to me for trusting too easily, for not locking the front door, or setting an alarm on my phone for a shorter nap. Ridiculous thoughts that logic couldn't quiet. Lena listened, sipping her tea slowly, then set the mug down and said, You're allowed to need space from all of it. Sarah, not just her, from the house. From proving you're okay, from deciding right now if forgiveness is on the table. We talked rules then. Not the ones Ben and I had sketched for Evelyn, but the ones I needed for myself. Transparency from him about any contact with his mom. No more assumptions that family helps meant unrestricted access. a shared password on our phones for the baby monitor app so I could see Ava anytime, even from miles away. Small things that felt petty until I said them aloud and realized they were boundaries, not punishments. She suggested I write them down. So I pulled out my phone's notes app and typed while she refilled the kettle, the soft clink of dishes in the background, grounding me. And when I finished, the list felt less like a weapon and more like armor. Lightweight, but necessary. That night, I slept in her guest room under a quilt, heavier than the one at home. The street outside quieter than our suburban cul-de-sac. No distant car doors or neighbor dogs barking, just the occasional hum of traffic on the main road. And for the first time in days, my dreams didn't feature earrings or slamming doors. They were vague, watercolor things of walking through fog, Ava's hand in mine, no pain, just forward motion. Saturday, I stayed in. Mostly, Lena had errands, but left me with the apartment to myself. So I pumped in the quiet living room, with sunlight slanting through the blinds, watched it pool on the hardwood, texted Ben a photo of the bottle I'd filled, received back a picture of Ava asleep on his chest during tummy time. Her little fist curled near his collarbone, no caption needed, because the image said, enough. He was there, holding steady, giving me this breathing room without resentment. We texted sparingly, updates mostly. Ava ate at noon. Diaper rash cream applied. Claire dropped off a casserole for dinner, but each message carried an undercurrent of care. His words careful not to push. Mine honest about the ache that still sat under my ribs, but was starting to feel less like a knife and more like a bruise. Tender but fading. Sunday morning, Lena and I walked to the coffee shop 2 blocks over, bundled against the wind. Me pushing an empty stroller I borrowed from her neighbor just to have something to hold on to, and overlattice decaf for me. We talked about what came next. I'd go home that afternoon. Not because the weekend had fixed anything, but because avoidance wasn't healing either. And when I returned, I wanted to see Ben's face first. First, gauge whether the space had helped him as much as it had me. Whether he'd respected the boundary of no surprise visits from Evelyn. Driving back the highway felt shorter, the sky clearing to a pale blue. I hadn't noticed on the way out. And when I pulled into our driveway, Ben was waiting on the front step with Ava in his arms, her head tucked under his chin, wearing the duck onesie again. And he didn't rush forward, just stood there, letting me come to them at my own pace. I took her from him slowly, breathing in her familiar baby scent, mixed with his shampoo, and she blinked up at me with those serious newborn eyes, earlobes still marked, but no longer the only thing I saw when I looked at her. There was her tiny nose, her soft cheeks, the way her fingers flexed like she was reaching for something. Only she could see. Ben waited until I met his gaze, then said quietly, I missed you, not dramatic, just true. And I didn't say it back yet, but I didn't step away either. When he leaned in to kiss my forehead, is brief and careful, the contact a question more than a claim. Inside, the house smelled like clean laundry, and the faint citrus of the cleaner he'd used on the counters. Small evidence he tried to make the space feel new again, and when we sat on the couch later, Ava, between us nursing contentedly, I opened my phone to the notes list from Lena's and handed it to him without preamble. He read it slowly, nodding once or twice, then looked up and said, These are fair. I'll follow them. And I'll make sure my mom understands too. Tomorrow, on the phone, no ambiguity. There was no pleading in his voice, just resolve. And for the first time since the discovery, I felt the knot in my chest loosen a fraction. Not gone, but less strangling. As if the weekend away had reminded me that space didn't have to mean distance forever. That rules could be love in practical form. And that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild the trust. One clear boundary at a time. The quiet hope flickering like the late afternoon. Light through the living room window. Steady enough to notice. Fragile enough to protect. Monday morning arrived with a brittle clarity. The kind that makes every sound sharper. The coffee grinder whirring in the kitchen while Ben measured grounds for the first pot since I'd come home. Ava's soft grunts from the bassinet as she stretched awake in the nursery. The distant rumble of the garbage truck making its weekly pass down our street. And I woke knowing today was the day I'd booked the first individual therapy session. Not couples yet, just me, because the anger still felt too jagged to share in a room with Ben without risking it, cutting us both deeper. And the guilt had started turning inward in quiet moments, whispering that if I'd been stronger, more awake, more assertive from the beginning, none of this would have happened. Even though rationally I knew no new mother should have to guard against her own family like that. I'd found the therapist through a recommendation from Lena's coworker, a woman named Dr. Patel, who specialized in postpartum issues and family boundary work. Her website promising a calm, non-judgmental space. And when I'd called last week from Lena's guest room, the receptionist had squeezed me in for a virtual slot at 10, saying cancellations happened often enough to make room for someone clearly in crisis. Though she phrased it more gently as, "We have an opening that might suit your schedule." Ben had offered to stay home from work to watch Ava, but I'd said no. I needed the house quiet for the call. Needed to do this alone first. So he left at 8:30, after kissing Ava's forehead and mine. Still careful. Still asking permission with his eyes. And I settled in the living room with my laptop on the coffee table, the baby monitor beside it. Curtains half drawn against the pale, winter light that filtered through the bare branches outside. Dr. Patel appeared on screen right on time, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, warm eyes behind thin frames, and she started by asking what brought me in. No rush. Just an open question that let me spill the story in pieces. The birth, the exhaustion, waking to pierced ears, Evelyn's casual justification, Ben's shock, but the lingering doubt, the weekend away that had helped but not healed. She listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. And when I paused, she asked gentle follow-ups. How does that powerlessness feel in your body right now? What would safety look like for you in this? Family? Dynamic? And I found myself crying again. Not the wild sobs of the first days, but a steady leak that felt almost relieving, like draining an abscess. We talked about small acts of vulnerability I could practice. Not with Ben or Evelyn, yet, but with myself. Naming the feelings out loud when they surged instead of swallowing them. Setting one tiny boundary a day, even if it was just saying, I need 10 minutes alone without explanation. Reminding myself that protecting Ava's autonomy started with protecting my own voice. By the end of the 50 minutes, I felt wrung out, but lighter, as if I'd carried the weight of the betrayal alone for too long, and finally handed over a corner of it to someone trained to hold it without flinching. After the call, I nursed Ava on the couch, her latch strong, now less tentative than in those early days. And I let myself notice the small things I'd been too hurt to see before. The way her eyelashes caught the light, the cut, the light, the soft fuzz on her head starting to darken, the perfect curve of her ear despite the tiny gold stud that still made my stomach dip when I looked too long. Around noon, Ben texted from the office. Everything okay? How was the session? And I replied honestly. Hard but good. Talk later. He sent back a thumbs up emoji and a heart. Simple, but enough to remind me. He was trying to stay connected without crowding, and that small exchange felt like another tentative step. Proof that space didn't have to mean silence. The afternoon passed in fragments of ordinary life. Folding a load of tiny onesies, still warm from the dryer, their fabric smelling faintly of baby detergent and the lavender sachet Evelyn used to tuck in the drawers before everything changed. And I hesitated over the scent for a moment before deciding not to throw it away. Not yet. Because erasing every trace of her felt like giving her more power than she deserved. When Ben got home at 6, he brought takeout Thai. Pad, CL for me. Green curry for him. Extra sticky rice, because he remembered I craved the sweetness postpartum. Kicking at the toys dangling above her, the clatter of chopsticks, and the low hum of the refrigerator filling the spaces where words still felt risky. After dinner, he offered to give her a bath, something we used to do together. But now he did alone, while I sat on the closed toilet lid, watching. Not because I didn't trust him, but because being near them, both felt grounding. The steam rising from the baby tub, the gentle pour of water over her scalp, his hands careful around her ears as he rinsed shampoo away without touching the piercings. When she was dried and dressed in fresh pajamas, he handed her to me for the last feed of the evening. And as she nursed, I felt the first real flicker of vulnerability toward him since the discovery. I said quietly, I told the therapist today that I am scared forgiving means forgetting. That if I let it go too soon, it'll happen again somehow. And he didn't rush to reassure or defend, just sat on the edge of the rocking chair and listened, then said, I get that. I'm scared, too, of losing you both, because I didn't stand up strong enough sooner. But I'm willing to keep showing up, however long it takes. There was no promise of perfection in his voice, just honesty. And when he reached out slowly, and Kate, palm up on the arm of the couch, I placed my free hand in his. After a long moment, fingers curling loosely, not gripping hard, but not pulling away either. The contact warm and steady, a small bridge rebuilt in the dim nursery light. Later, after Ava was down, and we brushed our teeth side by side in the bathroom mirror without speaking, I didn't suggest separate sleeping. Instead, I climbed into bed first, and when he slid in beside me, I shifted closer by an inch, enough that our shoulders touched under the covers. The gap narrower than the night before last, and he didn't push for more, just let out a soft breath, like relief. The sound barely audible over the white noise machine, humming in the corner. We lay there in the dark, listening to each other's breathing sink, gradually, the day's small vulnerabilities, settling between us like stones in a path. Therapy. Shared meals. A held hand. Proximity without demand. And though the hurt still lived under my ribs, quieter now, I felt the first stirrings of cautious hope that trust could be reground, not in grand gestures, but in these deliberate, everyday acts. Showing up for a session, offering a bath, leaving space for silence, reaching out without forcing an answer. Outside the window, the neighborhood slept under a clear February sky. Stars faint above the streetlights. Stores faint above the streetlights. And as sleep finally pulled me under, I let myself believe, just a little, that the scar from this betrayal might one day be part of our story without defining it. That we could carry the mark and still move forward together, step by tentative step. The first joint therapy session landed on a Wednesday in early March, 2 weeks after my solo start with Dr. Patel, the appointment booked for 7 p.m. So Ben could leave work a little early, and we could eat something quick beforehand. Grilled cheese sandwiches made with the last of the sourdough, cut into triangles the way Ava would one day demand. Though right now, she was too young to care. Just gumming a soft, teething rain, while we sat at the kitchen table. Trying to act like this was normal. Trying to act like this was normal. Like driving to a strip mall office suite to unpack our family fracture. In front of a stranger was just another errand on the weekly list alongside grocery. Pickup and pediatrician follow-up. Ben had suggested we try couples work when I mentioned during one of our late-night hallway talks. Him leaning against the doorframe, while I rocked. Ava that Dr. Patel thought it might help if we came together soon, not to force forgiveness, but to name the deeper currents beneath the surface hurt. His lifelong habit of softening his mother's edges to keep peace. My fear of being steamrolled again, the way I sometimes felt growing up with my own parents' well-meaning but overbearing advice. He'd agreed without hesitation, said he'd clear his calendar, and now here we were, pulling into the parking lot, under sodium lights that buzzed faintly. The building quiet, except for a few cars, scattered like ours. People seeking help, after hours when the day's distractions finally fell away. Dr. Patel greeted us in the small waiting area with the same calm presence I'd seen on screen, hand extended but not insistent, and led us into a room with 2 armchairs facing her glider, a box of tissues on the side table, a low bookshelf holding books on attachment and boundaries, nothing flashy, just functional comfort. We sat. Ava at home with Lena for the evening, a first since the incident that felt both terrifying and necessary. And Dr. Patel started by asking us each to share one sentence about why we were here, no interruptions. I went first, voice steadier than I expected. I'm here because my mother-in-law pierced my daughter's ears without permission 3 weeks ago, and it made me feel completely powerless in my own family, and I am scared that forgiving means opening the door to more violations. Ben spoke next. Quieter, eyes on his hands folded in his lap, I'm here because I didn't protect my wife and daughter the way I should have. I let old patterns with my mom slide because confrontation feels impossible. And now there's this distance between Sarah and me that I hate but don't know how to close. The words hung there, plain and painful, and Dr. Isa Patel nodded once, then asked us to stay with the feelings those sentences stirred. No rush to solve anything tonight. What followed was slow, almost excruciating in its honesty. I talked about how the betrayal wasn't just the act, but the assumption behind it. That Evelyn's experience trumped mine as Ava's mother. That my postpartum vulnerability was something to override rather than honor. And saying it aloud in front of Ben made the ache bloom fresh, but also made it smaller somehow, less monstrous when spoken. He listened without defending her, just nodded, jaw tight. And when it was his turn, he named the deeper issue, the way he'd learned early to manage his mom's disappointment by agreeing in the moment and hoping. Things blew over, a survival strategy from childhood arguments over curfews and college choices that carried into adulthood, into our marriage, into fatherhood. I thought saying no once was enough, he said, voice rough, but I see now it wasn't, not when she heard the hesitation underneath. I should have followed up, made it crystal clear, maybe even set consequences sooner. Dr. Patel guided us gently toward the impact. How my fear of being dismissed had made me withdraw. How his guilt had made him overcompensate with careful distance rather than steady presence, creating a loop where neither of us felt safe reaching first. We cried, me more openly, him with silent tears that tracked down his cheeks when he admitted he worried I might never look at him the same way again. And she let the silence hold. No rush to paper over the rawness. Toward the end, she suggested one small step for the week. Same room closeness, without pressure for more. Something physical but low stakes, like sitting on the couch together after Ava's bedtime, with hands touching, if it felt okay. No expectation of sex or deep talks, just shared space to remind our nervous systems that closeness could be safe again. We left the office quieter than when we arrived, the night air cool against flushed faces, streetlights, haloed from earlier rain, and in the car, Ben reached across the console slowly, palm up like he had that night in the nursery. And this time I didn't hesitate long before lacing my fingers through his, the grip firm, but not desperate, thumbs brushing in small, unconscious circles as he drove us home. Lena had Ava fed and changed when we walked in, handed her over with a quick hug and a murmured, "You two look like you did hard work tonight," then left us to the quiet house. The baby monitor humming softly as Ava settled in her crib upstairs. We didn't speak much at first, just moved through the familiar routine, locking doors, dimming lights, brushing teeth, side by side, and when we ended up on the living room couch with the TV off. Just the glow from the hallway nightlight spilling in, Ben sat first and patted the cushion beside him. I sat, close enough that our thighs touched. And after a moment, I rested my hand on his knee, not holding, but present, feeling the warmth of him through denim. The slight tremor in his leg that told me he was as nervous as I was about whether this bridge would hold. He covered my hand with his. Gentle pressure, and we stayed like that for what felt like a long time. Breathing in sync, the only sound. The faint tick of the wall clock, and the occasional creak of the house settling. No grand declarations. No rush to declare forgiveness or map out the future. Just the simple act of occupying the same space without armor, letting the quiet do some of the healing words. Couldn't yet reach. When we finally went upstairs to bed, I didn't ask for space. I slid under the covers and turned toward him, not quite spooning, but facing. Our foreheads almost touching in the dark, and when his arm came around my waist, tentative, questioning, I didn't pull away. Instead, I shifted closer, tucking my head under his chin, breathing in the familiar scent of his skin mixed with the day's faint cologne, and felt his heartbeat steady against my palm, where it rested, on his chest. We didn't speak, didn't need to. The day's naming of deeper issues had cleared a small path, and this, hands linked earlier, bodies closed now, was the first careful step along it. Fragile, but real. A reminder that trust wasn't gone entirely, just buried under hurt and waiting to be uncovered, layer by layer. Outside, the neighborhood slept under a waxing moon, porch lights winking off one by one. And as sleep came, I let myself feel the quiet hope that had been flickering for weeks finally catch a steadier flame. Not bright enough to banish every shadow, but enough to see the next foothold. Enough to believe that we could keep walking forward together. Scarred, but learning, one shared breath, one touched hand, one honest session at a time. The idea for the family weekend away came up almost casually during the session the week after our first joint one, Dr. Patel asking what small, contained experience might test the new ground we were treading without overwhelming it, and Ben suggested the cabin his family owned upstate. A 2-hour drive north through rolling hills, still patched with late winter snow. The place his parents had bought decades ago, as a retreat, but rarely used now that the kids were grown and scattered. He framed it carefully, said it could be just us, 3. No Evelyn. No extended family dropping by, unannounced, because he had already told her, weeks ago, that visits needed advance notice and mutual agreement. A boundary she'd accepted with clipped silence on the phone, but hadn't challenged since. I hesitated at first. The thought of being away from home, stirring a flicker of the old powerlessness, of being in someone else's space again, but the cabin wasn't hers anymore in any real way. Ben paid the taxes, handled the upkeep. And the last time we'd gone, pre-pregnancy, pre-Ava, it had felt like hours. Quiet mornings, with coffee on the screened porch. Afternoons, reading by the lake that was still half frozen this time of year. So I agreed, tentative, but curious to see if shared new air could do what living room closeness had started, and we booked the long weekend for mid-March. Packing the car Thursday night, after Ava's bath. Diapers, bottles, the portable white noise machine, my nursing pillow, Ben's old fleece that still smelled faintly of wood smoke from past trips, and the baby carrier I finally mastered wearing without pinching my scar. We left Friday morning after rush hour, Ava strapped into her car seat, babbling at the dangling toys we'd clipped to the handle. The highway stretching out under a sky that promised sun by afternoon, radio tuned low to a playlist of soft indie we both still liked. No need to fill every silence with talk, because the miles did some of the work for us. The first hours passed in easy rhythm. Stops for coffee at a rest area, where Ben held Ava while I used the bathroom, her tiny hat slipping over one eye, making us both smile without forcing it. And by the time we turned onto the winding county road, the tension I'd carried in my shoulders since the discovery had loosened enough to notice its absence, replaced by something lighter, watchful, but not wary. The cabin looked the same as I remembered. Cedar siding weathered gray, stone chimney, the wide porch steps, still needing a coat of paint, Ben always promised to get to someday. And when we pulled up, snow crunched under the tires, the lake beyond glittering cold and still, a few stubborn ice patches catching the light. Inside smelled of pine and faint, must the kind that comes from a place closed up for months. But Ben had arranged for our local service to come through earlier in the week, heat on, fridge stocked with basics. Fresh linens, so it felt welcoming rather than neglected. We settled in slowly. I nursed Ava on the worn couch facing the big window while Ben unpacked groceries and started a fire in the stone hearth. The crackle and pop of kindling filling the quiet like a heartbeat. And when she finished, I carried her to the window to watch the late afternoon sun drop behind the ridge, her head heavy on my shoulder, breath warm against my neck. And for the first time in weeks, the earrings didn't dominate my view of her. I saw instead the soft curve of her cheek, the way her lashes fluttered as she drifted toward sleep, the small victory of her body, trusting mine again. After all, the fussing and ointment. That evening, we ate simple pasta Ben, cooked on the ancient electric stove, tomato sauce from a jar, garlic bread from the freezer, and afterward bundled Ava into her snowsuit for her first real outdoor moment. Just a short walk down to the dock where the water lapped softly against pilings. Ben carrying her in the carrier against his chest, while I walked beside them, our gloved hands brushing occasionally. No words needed, because the cold air and the crunch of boots on the path said enough. Back inside. Back inside. After Ava was down in the pack, Aiden, play, we'd set up in the small bedroom. We sat on the rug in front of the fire, wine for him, herbal tea for me, and the conversation turned deeper without forcing. I told him how the weekend felt like proof we could still choose each other even when things were hard, how the cabin reminded me of the early days when we'd come here to dream about kids, without knowing how messy it would get. And he admitted the guilt still woke him some nights. Replaying the moment he could have texted Evelyn back, absolutely not. Instead of "we'll see," the small hesitation that had let her barrel forward. We cried again, quieter this time, tears that felt cleansing rather than drowning. And when he reached for me, I went willingly. And when he reached for me, I went willingly. Curling into his side on the rug, his arm around my shoulders, my head on his chest, listening to the steady thump beneath his sweater. The firelight dancing across the walls like it was trying to warm the last cold corners between us. Later, in the bedroom with Ava breathing softly nearby. We made love for the first time since before she was born. Slow, careful, mindful of my healing body and the emotional terrain we were still navigating. His hands tracing scars and stretch marks with reverence rather than haste. My fingers in his hair anchoring me when the vulnerability threatened to tip into fear, and afterward we lay tangled under the heavy quilt, breathing together, no rush to speak, just the shared warmth and the knowledge that this closeness wasn't erasure of the hurt, but proof we could hold both. The betrayal and the love, the scar and the healing. Saturday brought more small reconnections. Morning coffee on the porch, wrapped in blankets, while Ava napped inside. Ben reading aloud from an old paperback we found on the shelf, his voice low and steady. An afternoon walk where I carried her this time, feeling her weight as a privilege rather than a burden. Quiet moments in the kitchen, where our hands met over chopping vegetables for soup, lingering without pulling away. Sunday, we drove to a nearby trailhead, short enough for postpartum legs, and stood at an overlook watching the lake shimmer below. Ava tucked inside my coat against the wind, Ben's arm around us both, and when he said softly, "I'm sorry again," every day, I didn't brush it off or rush to absolve. Instead, I leaned into him and whispered, "I know, and I'm starting to believe we can keep going." The words simple but heavy with emerging forgiveness. Not complete, not perfect, but real enough to carry us home. The drive back Sunday evening was quieter. Ava asleep in the back, headlights cutting through the dark. And when we pulled into our own driveway, the house looked smaller. Somehow. Less like a place of fracture, and more like the starting point for whatever came next. We unloaded the car in companionable silence. Put Ava down together, and when we climbed into our own bed later, I reached for his hand under the covers without hesitation, fingers threading through his. The contact familiar and new at once. The weekend hadn't erased the mark on Ava's ears or the memory of powerlessness, but it had layered something stronger over it. Proof that we could choose, repair. That shared space and honest touch could rebuild what words alone couldn't. That forgiveness was emerging not as a single moment, but as a series of deliberate returns to each other, to our daughter, to the family we were still becoming. Outside, spring was edging closer, the first crocuses pushing through the mulch in the front yard. In the front yard, and as sleep came, I felt the quiet certainty settle deep. We weren't unbroken, but we were mending, stronger in the places we'd had to stitch, ready to face the next season, together with eyes open and hands linked. A year to the day since that February afternoon, when I woke to the sight of tiny gold studs in Ava's ears and felt the ground shift beneath everything I thought I knew about trust and family. The kitchen calendar still hangs on the same wall. The square for February 27th, now marked with a small pencil heart. Ben drew without fanfare last week when he flipped the page. A quiet acknowledgement that we'd made it through the hardest stretch without breaking apart. And as I stand at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, the same blue ones we bought on our honeymoon. Chipped now, but still favorites. I catch myself noticing how ordinary the morning feels. How the ache that once lived sharp and constant under my ribs has dulled to something more like a faint scar tissue, tender when pressed, but no longer bleeding. Ava is one now, toddling across the living room rug in mismatched socks. One with ducks. One plain white, her dark curls bouncing as she chases the red ball that rolls just out of reach, laughing, the high. But the ba, unself-conscious laugh that still stops me mid-breath, because it's hers alone, untouched by the choices anyone else made about her body. The earrings are gone, removed at her 6-month checkup after months of careful discussion with the pediatrician and between Ben and me. The tiny holes closed over almost completely. Faint, pale marks that will probably fade entirely with time. And though I still feel a pang when I see baby pictures from those early weeks where they glint in the frame, the pang no longer carries rage or powerlessness, just a reminder of how far we've come. Ben comes in from the garage where he's been tinkering with the snowblower. We barely needed this mild winter, wiping his hands on a rag, And when he sees me watching Ava, he smiles the small private smile that's become our shorthand for "we're okay," then crosses the room to scoop her up, blowing raspberries on her neck until she squeals and grabs fistfuls of his hoodie. We sit together on the couch for the first time, in what feels like forever, without an agenda. No therapy session looming, no boundary to negotiate. Just coffee cooling on the side table while Ava climbs between us, smearing banana from breakfast across Ben's knee and giggling when he pretends to be horrified. The house is quieter these days, in the best way. Evelyn visits once a month now, always announced, always with us both present. Her conversations careful and measured since that long phone call Ben had with her last spring, where he laid out the new rules without apology. Love didn't mean unrestricted access. Help didn't mean override. And though the relationship isn't what it was, it isn't severed either. She brings books and soft toys, sits on the floor to play blocks with Ava under our watchful eyes. And when she leaves, she hugs us both, brief but genuine, the old sharpness gone from her voice when she says, "I'm trying. I really am." We've kept up the individual therapy, for me, and couple sessions, every 6 weeks. Less frequent now, but steady. A maintenance, rather than a crisis intervention. And last month, Dr. Patel asked what forgiveness looked like to each of us. I said it looked like mornings like this. One, where I could look at Ben and feel love without the shadow of doubt, trailing every thought. And he said it looked like knowing he had chosen differently next time, that the guilt had become accountability instead of shame. We don't talk about the earrings every day anymore, or even every week. They surface occasionally in small ways, when Ava points to her ears and says, "Ow," because she bumped them on the crib rail. Or when I'm sorting old photos and pause on one from the hospital discharge. But the conversations are softer now, less about blame and more about what we learned. That trust can fracture in an instant, but rebuilds in countless deliberate moments. That protecting our daughter means protecting the space between us two. That family isn't defined by blood or tradition alone, but by who shows up consistently to repair what's broken. This afternoon, we're taking Ava to the park down the street, the one with the baby swings and the little wooden bridge over the creek. Over the creek, bundled against the lingering February chill that still nips at the edges, even as crocuses are starting to nose through the mulch again. A full circle from that rainy week when everything cracked open. Ben pushes the stroller while I walk beside him, our hands brushing every few steps until he catches mine properly, fingers lacing, without asking, the contact as natural as breathing. Now. And when we reach the swings, he lifts Ava in first, settling her carefully, her little legs kicking with delight as the swing moves in gentle arcs. I stand behind, pushing lightly, watching her face light up with each forward motion, the wind ruffling her curls, And Ben comes around to stand next to me, his arm sliding around my waist, chin resting on my shoulder. However, both of us watching our daughter like she's the only thing in the world that matters because right now she is. There's no perfection here, no fairy tale ending, where every hurt vanishes and every boundary holds forever, without effort. But there is this. A scarred but stronger bond, rebuilt, not despite the betrayal, but because we chose to face it together. Day after day, choosing repair over resentment, presence over distance, love that knows how to apologize and how to accept one. Later, back home with Ava napping upstairs and the late afternoon sun slanting golden through the windows, Ben and I sit at the kitchen table with fresh coffee, Kenneth Tilver, talking about nothing important. The grocery list, whether to repaint the nursery, if we should plan a summer trip somewhere warm. And when he reaches across to cover my hand with his, I don't pull away. I turn my palm up, meet his fingers halfway, and feel the quiet certainty settle deep that whatever comes next, another challenge, another boundary tested, another season, we'll meet it side by side, not unbroken, but undeniably mended. The trust we lost and found again, stronger for having been hard earned. The family we're building, not flawless, but fiercely, deliberately ours.